Welcome to the Possibility Action Network podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Middleton, aka Possibility Man. We are committed to bringing you guests who strive to better people's lives and serve as a force for good in the world. Our guest today is Dr. Gail Christopher. She is a naturopathic doctor and an award-winning social change agent. She is widely recognized for her holistic approach to helping Americans work together for the common good. She has held key positions with organizations such as the Kellogg Foundation and the Institute for Government Innovation. Dr. Christopher is the executive director of the National Collaborative for Health Equity and the author of RX Racial Healing, a guide to embracing our humanity. Dr. Christopher, welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Dr. Middleton, for inviting me. I look forward to our conversation.
Me too. But first, a reminder to our listeners and our viewers, follow, like, and share this podcast. Wherever you find it, your support matters and actually gives you the opportunity to co-create with us, with Dr. Christopher and me. And look, in my introduction, Dr. Christopher, I mentioned that your strategies will surely benefit Americans, but in thinking about the world today, my hunch is your strategies are good for the world. What do you say about that?
Well, certainly, I appreciate you saying that. I'm focused, as they say, on the promise of domestic tranquility here in this country, but I have worked internationally as well. The idea of jettisoning the false belief in a hierarchy of human value, there's a global need for that. The idea of human value hierarchy is global in nature. Many societies are struggling with that. And so this ability to develop the capacity to see ourselves in one another and to genuinely extend love to one another, that is work for all of us all over the planet.
Indeed. I mean, it's October 2024 as we're having this conversation. Ukraine, with Russia has been going on for a while, Hamas, Palestinian organization, and Israel. And just, I think this week, a few days ago, Iran missiles, it's just crazy out there. Dr. Christopher, what's going on with us humans?
It really is a challenging time. I think we have this confluence of factors. I believe there's always been violence in the world, and there have always been wars. If you think about the wars in Africa, the war in the Congo, there's been violence and suffering. We've never had it so visible in our daily news feeds, in our daily lives. Now, I'll grant you the situation in Europe is unique. We certainly haven't seen that since World War II. But we've always lived with conflict. Some communities have, but there's something about our information technology, our social media, this misnomer of artificial intelligence. I think we should name that what it is, which is simply automated information. But that's another conversation. I do believe that the level of violence, the Sudan, what's happening in the Middle East, Ukraine, and it goes on and on and on. I think it is a function of several technological, we could say advances, both the information advances and the weaponry that we have now. And there's just this flood of those things, which are, I think, creating a lot of stress and needless suffering in the world.
Yeah. I love that you offer us a way to say that human beings can heal, the kinds of forces that cause us to want to destroy one another, or at least harm one another, or just ignore one another. I love the word healing. So I'll get deep into that in a moment, but let me roll back just a bit, just to take a broader view. You are an accomplished naturopathic doctor. And, why did you choose that path early on?
Hmm. I think that path chose me, Doctor.
Mm.
Um, it was really, well, I'll go back way back in history, my
Okay.
personal history. But I met one of our leading social activists when I was just a sophomore in college and undergraduate school. You may remember him. He's passed on now, but Dick Gregory.
Oh, yes.
And Dick, I had somehow managed to be in charge of bringing speakers to our campus back then. And I brought in as many speakers of color as I could, and I brought in Dick Gregory to speak to our students.
Mm.
And he had just completed some major transformations in his own life, significant fasting and significant weight loss. And he was really in a spiritual place. And when I
Mm.
met him, he talked about me, he talked about my aura, my purpose in life, and he foretold that I was going to have a baby girl, and then said, if you're going to need help, and here's my card, here's my number, this is my home number. So a few years passed, and I did give birth to my first child, and I remembered that conversation. And we had taken her for her 6-week checkup, and the doctors diagnosed a congenital heart defect.
Oh.
And they told us there was nothing that could be done, at least not until she was 6 years old, and that we should just, take her home. And
Mm.
I just couldn't accept that. And so I remembered I prayed, I remembered the conversation. And so I dug down in my trunk and I found this
Mm.
card and I called Dick Gregory. Ironically, he answered the phone and he remembered me. And I told him
Mm.
what was going on. And he said to me, can you get to Chicago? I would like for my doctor in Chicago to take a look at her. And so I said, yes, of course. We took her to Chicago. And that was when I was introduced to this holistic understanding of health and well-being. And I made a decision then that I wanted to become that kind of doctor.
Mm.
And I went back home to Cleveland. And as it turned out, she made her transition the night before we were scheduled to leave to move to Chicago. And
Okay.
I always think of her as an angel that came to me to put me on my path. And
Yeah.
so when I say I think this work, holistic health and well-being, it
Mm.
it it chose me.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And my heart felt that, losing your daughter, but you have reframed it, not just hurt, but also putting you on this mission. That's beautiful in itself. Now, in working with patients, um, y- today, gosh, it seems like there's a pill for every ill. But in working with patients back in the day, did you take that approach or did you have another approach?
Well, our training in my preparation for clinical work, we were really grounded in the understanding that the body has the inherent capacity to heal itself,
Mm.
that it literally creates itself, during that period of development in the womb. And so it is always balancing itself or trying to, right?
Mhm.
And so our role as holistic practitioners, our role is to support those innate properties and capacities. And in one sense, this type of work is what I like to define as relational work,
Mm.
understanding that how well we are, how well our innate capacities for healing and regeneration, how well those function is directly related to the quality of our relationships in life,
Mm.
our relationships with other human beings, our
Yeah.
relationships with food and with the environment, our
Mhm.
relationships with ourselves, different
Yeah.
dimensions of ourselves. And
Mhm.
so my work was largely educating and certainly doing the physical examinations, but I was more focused on health and well-being and less focused on we did not diagnose and treat pathology. Basically, we helped people to optimize their own capacity for healing and well-being.
Well, I'm glad that you started that path many years ago. Today, it does seem, though, that some physicians are trying to catch up. You know, the whole field of lifestyle medicine surely
Absolutely.
recognizes,
Yeah.
connectedness and all of that. Now, here you are, this holistic doctor, treating patients, you're educating them about lifestyle, and then you are embarking upon this path you call, and I love the phrase, racial healing. What pointed you there?
Well, I was practicing in Chicago on the South Side.
Mm,
And so many of the people who came to see me were people of color. And most of my patients at the time were suffering from chronic conditions and or issues of infant mortality and
mm,
infertility. And so I soon learned that the changes that needed to be made in terms of diet and health and well-being, those changes needed to be made by people who were disproportionately burdened with the stress that is precipitated by exposure to discrimination and to denied opportunity. And so that I realized that these disproportionate burdens for people of color were directly related to the stress of living with a system of racial hierarchy in this country.
yeah.
And back then, there was a classic textbook called the Textbook of Black Diseases. I believe
Mm,
the author was Williams at the time. He was a cardiologist. And it was quite eye-opening for me. What did we mean by Black diseases, right?
mm,
Well, he was documenting the disparities and
yeah.
everything from hypertension to cardiovascular to diabetes. And from my perspective, I could see the barriers to opportunity and the burdens of, dealing with discrimination and denial of full humanity.
Mhm,
I could see how that was translating
mhm.
into stress in the body, and that stress was interfering with the processes of maintaining health and well-being.
Yeah, I get that. Surely, all human beings face health conditions. But if you happen to be, indigenous American, Black American, or some other, marginalized group, it seems like there's double duty. It's like you got the ordinary stuff, but you also got the burden of racial hierarchy, as you put it. I want to get into that more deeply in a moment now. But in your work, I've noticed that, and you've said it, that story is important. Is there more to your story that you can share with us as we? I want to take this broad view, and we'll narrow it down in a moment. But is there more to your story that you want to share to help us get ready for this whole subject of racial hierarchy and the like?
Well, I appreciate that question. Let me think about that. I will
Okay.
share that the daughter that made her transition as an infant, her name was Ntianu, and
Ah.
Ntianu means noble spirit.
Mm,
And I was blessed to then have two other children who
mm,
are healthy and were healthy and are now adults in their own right today. But that determination that grew up in me to have healthy children, had did inform my work. I read
mhm,
everything that I could in terms of what it takes to have healthy children. And many of my patients in those years were women who were struggling to do the same. I went on and, developed social programs and interventions over the decades that helped women to have healthy children. When I was with the Kellogg Foundation, a big portion of the funding work that we did was about improving birth outcomes. So that
mm,
became a theme throughout my career. Um, I was introduced to the importance of nature And the center that I have here in Maryland now is named in honor of my firstborn. It's the Intianu Center for Healing and Nature. And so I guess you could say that was sort of life changing and life forming experiences early that guided my career.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's not only a health path, as I feel you, is also a spiritual path, and I get that as you share your story. And then this seems to be, I mean, working with patients is one thing, but I would think that the most difficult thing that you could embark upon is to promote racial healing. But I want to start with the problem. The problem as we see it in America. What is the problem that you're trying to address?
Well, I'm going to pick up on what you said about the spiritual path,
Okay.
or consciousness.
Hmm.
I believe the ultimate unaddressed issue, if you will, despite the Civil War, despite the civil rights movement, despite all of the progress that's been made in our society, what we have failed to do is to understand the power of belief to drive behavior and action and to sustain the realities with which we contend. And that's why I said earlier, this idea, and that's what it was a
Hmm.
false idea, an ideology of a taxonomy of humanity, where one group was at the top and others were of descending value, and African people of African descent were placed at the bottom. And this was by, leaders centuries ago during the alleged period of enlightenment. And that legacy of that taxonomy translated into a cultural ethos in this country.
Hmm.
In my belief, it was the ethos upon which we built this nation
Hmm.
in terms of this idea, this false idea of a hierarchy of human value. And I contend that unless we deal with that, unless we apply what we know about psychology, about emotional intelligence, about neuroscience and cognition, unless we apply what we know about how you change beliefs, how you change minds, we will not get to the root of the problem and have
Hmm.
sustained transformation. And
Hmm.
so when you ask what is the problem, my answer is we haven't dealt with the core raison d'etre, which
Hmm.
is this embrace of this false ideology of human value.
Yeah, I hear you there. In fact, I share that those sentiments. It seems to me though that sometimes, the majority are quickly turned off when they're invited to look at the problem, or tune out of real conversations. What has been your experience?
Well, I've tried to apply some wisdom about how people change.
Mhm.
And we, in the work that I was privileged to design and launch at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, a national truth, racial healing, and transformation effort, it's a five-step strategy or five pillars, but most importantly, it's a process. The process begins with envisioning success.
Mhm.
In the social sciences and in social advocacy, we are problem focused. But the thing that we focus on is what we enlarge in our lived experience. And so I felt it was critically important that we focus on the future that we are trying to create. And I
Mhm.
think that there's so much in our espoused uh, potential for this country, that all are created equal, that we are
Mhm.
endowed, by our creator with inalienable rights. There's so much in our aspired values, if you will,
Mhm.
aspirational values, that we can design an intervention that doesn't call people out, but calls people in to help
Yeah.
work together to
Mhm.
actualize that amazing potential in our democracy.
I like the way you put that, to call people in. And I think in elsewhere, I've heard you use the word invitation. This is an
Right.
invitation. Yeah. In fact, this may be a good place for me to mention, Dr. Christopher, how I found you. I
Okay.
just, on YouTube, and then I came
Huh.
across your TEDx talk some time ago.
Oh,
And the moment I heard
okay.
it, I thought, that's it. I said, let me try to find Dr. Christopher. That's it, because you had people laughing. They seemed to have been having good. They seemed to connect with your message, which I thought was part spiritual as well as other aspects of it. So this invitation is important. Yeah. So, but let's look at your invitation though, because I think what I get from you is that we could create a better society. And this is good for all of us. It's good for Indigenous Americans. It's good for everybody. Are you inviting us to a higher place as humans?
Well, and I wouldn't say it's just me. I
Uh-huh.
think that our way of being, our ecological crises that we're in, our gift of the opportunity to create the most and the first multiracial democracy. I think
Mhm.
our very essence is inviting us to a higher place,
Yeah.
to another level of understanding and awareness. One could give it a time factor. I think these times certainly are inviting all of us. We
Mhm.
we are tired of the hatred and
Yeah.
the vitriol. As a society, so many of us hunger for something that is more soothing and more in alignment with
Yeah.
what we know to be our true way of being. And so the
Yeah.
call, I think, I may be a vehicle through which it's being issued, but there are thousands of other people. There's so much work going on in this country right now to
Mm.
build bridges, to overcome trauma, and to help us actualize what I believe is our true nature, which is really
Yeah.
love.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. That's the spiritual part again. And that's true. When you look at this country, and of course, we know a lot of people around the world, as we said in the beginning, are affected by hierarchy of human value. But this country, when the founders framed this constitution and wrote the declaration earlier, it gave us, at least in part, a kind of formula about who we are and how we are connected to all that is. So this seems to be, Dr. Christopher, the next evolution, of actually putting that thing in practice.
I agree with that. In fact, we know that while those words were spoken, there
Mm,
was total hypocrisy in terms of the writers of those words.
mhm,
And we know that the centuries of enslavement and the taking of the indigenous people's lands and the forced, semi-incarceration in boarding schools and
mhm.
all of the things that happened that denied the aspirations that were expressed in the
Yeah,
Declaration of Independence and, in the Constitution. Those things happened over centuries, but there was always segments of this country that were fighting that. I
yeah.
recently read an
Mm,
amazing book called The Slave's Cause, and
mm,
it's 600 pages that documents the 100-year
mm.
multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious,
Yeah,
multi-political party struggle
yeah,
to actually end slavery, which,
yeah.
predated the Civil War. So I like to remind people that it is a journey. We're on the
Mhm.
journey and we're privileged to be on it, but it's always a journey that requires multiple perspectives, multiple groups to work together for the greater good.
That's beautiful. And I think sometimes we forget, I've called it the cooperative movement, just not just one group, but people working together to make things better. And, racial hierarchy or racism, that dreaded word, hurts. And just this, and I'm going to talk about public education in a moment, but I remember my mother was a foster parent. And I came to visit her some years ago, and she had some kids there.
Mhm.
And the parents were on drugs. They were drug addicts. But my mother did not make distinction based on color of skin. So she said she took them in. We went to visit my mother. One of the boys was about 6 years old. And within 30 minutes, he was calling me nigger.
Ouch.
So my point here, doctor, is that the kid didn't know what he was saying, but he had heard
Mhm.
that
Oh,
somewhere, and he saw me, and he simply spoke what he had heard about. What do you say? Would you say that's the way this stuff works? Is that people are
oh,
imitators, and yeah,
that's what I meant by this cultural ethos. You know,
mm,
it's literally, well, figuratively speaking, it's in the water. You know, I
yeah,
mean, it is in our media, it's in our books, and children definitely reflect what they hear and see and experience in their homes.
yeah,
So, and that's why breaking the cycle, you know, requires bringing people together in a non-threatening situation to
mm,
share their stories, their personal stories, their lived experience, and allowing us to begin to peel away, you know, the perceived differences. I mean, there are many differences that are wonderful and we hold on to them, but they
mm,
are not differences of our value as human beings, right? They're
mm,
not differences in terms of our basic human needs for connection and our basic human capacity for healing and for
yeah,
creativity. And so
yeah,
this work, these circles that we facilitate, they create opportunities for diverse people to come together for,
mm,
for, for at least 2 hours, sometimes longer, and really listen and really share stories. And you just can't go through that experience without, if it's well facilitated, without
yeah,
being in many ways changed, because we live in a society between major media and social media. We can go through our entire lives being bombarded
mm,
with lies and
yeah.
never like that little boy, right? And never really seeing and connecting with or listening to the humanity of people who are different from us.
Yeah, and I would imagine, and I want you to comment on this, that there are a lot of people who are from the majority who probably carry hurtful things that they witnessed or heard or seen perpetrated against other people. Just this one quick example that you can comment on. I was working in another state and I headed a small program, and this guy came to see me. And what he wanted to tell me is that, and he was from the majority group, what he had witnessed as a boy and the trauma it caused him to see the hurt caused in other people. So I would suspect that there are a lot of people who have stories that they haven't shared with others about what they witnessed. What do you think about that?
Well, there's no question. One
Mm,
story that happened when I was a teenager.
mm,
Um, I went to Chautauqua Institute in New York, and I was there I was pursuing a career in the arts, right? And it was the first time I'd ever been in an integrated setting because I grew up in Cleveland in a segregated neighborhood. But suddenly I was in a house, a Victorian house with young people of different races. I shared a room with a white person who was also from Cleveland, but from the other side of Cleveland, the west side, right? And I was from the east
mm,
side. Anyway, we became fast friends over that summer, and we walked to classes, we ate some meals together, we talked about our families, and it was a friendship, which for me at that point, the veil of racism had kind of disappeared. We were just two young people.
mhm,
And toward the end of that summer, I was coming home to the house, to the Victorian house, and I saw an ambulance parked in front of the house.
mm.
And I said, "Oh my goodness." So I picked up my pace, I ran, and I got to the porch, and they were carrying my roommate out on a stretcher.
Oh my.
And I turned to the house parents and I said, What happened? She was not conscious when they were carrying her out. And they told me that she had attempted suicide.
Oh my God.
And I ran upstairs to the room that we had shared, and she had written a note to me, and it was on my bed. And she had said, "Dear Gail, I've come to know you over these weeks as a friend, and I appreciate who you are. My father has taught, and it was a but in there. She said, but my father has taught me to hate Black people.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to live like that any longer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as it turned out, her father was a police officer in Cleveland, by the way. But, and I never knew if they were able to revive her or not. I don't know what became of her. But that experience stayed with me forever. And I believe it had something to do with developing a level of empathy in my own heart for the burden that many white people carry. You use the
Yeah.
term majority, but many who are not experiencing the types of racism that people of color experience, many of those people also carry the pain and the burden of this.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. And their stories can be a part of this dialogue as well. There's a lot of talk today about trauma, complex trauma, childhood trauma, CPTSD, and all of those things are true. But I've been thinking a lot about public education in our country, the public schools, from first grade to seniors. And I can just imagine, now, maybe I'm just wrong, and I'm not trying to blame teachers or school leaderships or anything like that. But I just can imagine, though, that while kids are going through a lot, that Black children may be going through something as well, that they may not even know how to express it, the way if they're in an environment that doesn't respect them as, fully human beings because of color of skin. What's your hunch about that? Maybe I'm off base. Correct me. Look, I'm an old guy now. Maybe I'm out of touch with reality. What do you think?
Well, I mean, part of my work over the decades, it started my first multicultural education curriculum that I helped to develop was for K through 12 education facilities. It was called Americans All, and
Mm,
it retold the history of the United States from multiple ethnic and racial perspectives. Now, this was
mm,
back in the 70s and 80s.
mm,
So it was true then, and I think it's still true now in terms of
mm,
the need for, because we still have this disparity as far as the educating population, the teachers, and the student populations. We still have a
mm,
majority teaching population and a
yeah.
majority children of color learning. And
Mm,
so if teachers haven't had help in, I'll use my Star Trek term, jettisoning,
yeah.
their conscious and unconscious adherence to a false
Mm,
ideology of human hierarchy, they are going to unintentionally, most often,
mhm,
bring that set of beliefs into the classroom, that set of
mhm.
negative beliefs about the young people. And part
Yeah.
of what inspired me to develop this program, I was consulting in a school in Chicago, and I watched this teacher, uh, you know, line the kids up to go to recess. And to the little girls, she said, "Now, young ladies, I want you to form a nice line." And she was, very solicitous and blah blah blah. And they
Mhm.
did that. And then for the boys, she said, "Boys, get in line." And the boys got up and ran to the line, right? Like little
Mhm.
energetic 5 and 6-year-old boys would do, right? And she immediately called them back to their seats and she said, "You're acting like heathens," and da 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 da. And
Mhm.
I just stood there and went, "Oh my
Mhm.
goodness.
Yeah.
Here they are." I think they were first graders. And and this was actually happening and she didn't even realize what she was doing.
Mhm.
And that was a lived experience that motivated me, an observation, to develop what I then called appreciative learning, which
Mhm.
was a set of tools and resources to help educators design their classroom management strategies in ways that were going to affirm the humanity of all their children.
Yeah.
And we incorporated that into the Americans All K through 12 curriculum. So yes, I agree 100%. I think your
Mhm.
observations are there. We have to be intentional about overcoming this legacy we have in this country.
Indeed. And, and this, I'm glad you put the word healing in it, because just like in therapy, if you haven't dealt with your own healing, you're going to have difficulty helping someone deal with their healing. And I would think the same applies here. If you're a teacher and you haven't dealt with your own racial healing needs, it may affect some other people there for sure. So public education is important. Any other comments on that point before I go on to something else that I got to ask you about?
No, I just think we still have a lot of work to do. We're well over 50 years post Brown, versus the Board of Education, but our schools are more segregated today than they were then. So there's a lot of work that remains to be done.
For sure. What I like about the invitation is that, and we may talk more about this later, but somehow you feel about this is that everyone may not want to go. Some people may not want to go on this, and we have to be able to say goodbye to them, but still invite those who want to go. What do you think about that? I mean, everyone may not want to go. What are your thoughts about that? Some may not want to go, Dr. Christopher.
Well, we're talking hundreds of millions of people that make up this country. And the dynamics of a democracy have to do with majority and supermajority, not everyone, right? And so
That's right.
Clearly you want to bring people into this work and create and expand, if you will, a coalition of the willing. And we want to get to that tipping point, to that supermajority and it's happened. We have to get there, but we definitely don't want to coerce or force anyone to be a part of this way of being and thinking.
Yeah. And I like the way you put that, just about being. And, I think the human heart, the human organism is built to connect with other humans, regardless of artificial characteristics. We just have to create that space for them. What do you think about that?
There's no question we are by nature relational human beings. Our current Surgeon General has written a wonderful book called Together, where he pulls together most of the science that documents the fundamental reality that we as human beings are relational. And the most important thing to our well-being is our connection with other human beings. And that is one reason why this hierarchy is so harmful, because it goes against our basic grain as human beings, right? And so there's no question. And it is hard work. And the sort of on-ramp for that hard work are the authentic stories that we share. You may not remember much of what I've said today, but I imagine those stories may stay with you. And we all have stories, and that's the stories tap into our emotions. We lean in differently to hear the stories. And that's a very important part of the process of change and transformation.
Now, I want to deal with my next few questions as delicately as I possibly can, because I want to look at, we've already been talking about it, possible solutions to this problem of racial hierarchy, or the dreaded R word, if you want to put it that way as well. Now, I've been, tell you real quickly, you may think that I'm pretty strange, but I went to a meeting once where this prominent, nationally renowned speaker was talking about, the dreaded R word. And I left there depressed. I left the meeting with my energy sucked out of me, because it was, I don't know, I'm not sure if it was fighting racism. I'm not sure what it was, but I didn't feel clean when I left. Now, anti-racism, is that what you advocate? We get out there with,
Absolutely not.
Okay.
And I'll talk about that on multiple levels, right? And let me not criticize or dismiss. All of this work evolves, and some of the early work to bring about the transformation, which they even called racial healing at the time, but it was in fact anti-racism work. And so I believe that the subject, not the modifier, right? The subject that we focus on is what grows in our experience. So we're coming out of about a 5-year window post the George Floyd brutal murder. where anti-racism was the rage, right? Uh, have you noticed that racism seems more pronounced now than it did before then? And
Mm-hmm.
I would suggest that, we might say anti, but the consciousness doesn't hear anti, it just hears racism. And so
Mm.
for me, I feel like we have to focus on what it is we're trying to achieve. We have
Yeah.
to focus on what we're for, not what we're against. What
Yeah.
we are for is this capacity to have a shared embrace of our equal humanity and our equal value. That's what we're for, right?
Yeah.
And this work, what I call RX or prescription racial healing, is
Mm-hmm.
really bringing into clear vision, if you will, what's possible. And what's
Mm-hmm.
possible is this shared sense of our humanity. I mean,
Yeah.
I hurt when I see people suffer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most of us do. Most of us can't stand to hear the cry of a child without wanting to respond. And that's just how we're wired as human
Mm-hmm.
beings.
Yeah.
And so the work we have to do has to move us forward in that direction. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that the work of anti-racism didn't have its place, but
Mm-hmm.
I am saying that the 21st century should compel us to help to bring into actualization, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
this next level of understanding.
Yeah, I like that. And right, we're not attacking old. Look, you used the phrase "old models." When I saw this, yeah,
Right?
that's it. Old
Yep.
models.
Yep.
Tell us a little more about what you meant, what you mean when you talk about old models, because
Well,
I've heard it, and I want people listening here to hear it
okay,
too.
one of my heroes from the 20th century. It's such a blessing to have lived to talk about another century, right? I lived through, but
Yeah.
one of my heroes from the 20th century was the architect and thought leader Buckminster Fuller.
Mm-hmm.
And and Buckminster Fuller said, change, and I'm sort of modifying this a little bit, but he said change doesn't happen by attacking existing models. Change happens when we create new models that make the old models obsolete.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've seen that in this 21st century. Uber has basically made the old models of transportation obsolete. I mean, even the Airbnb phenomenon has dramatically disrupted the model of hotels for vacations, right? So we know that if we create a new model that is compelling enough, it will disrupt and ultimately replace the old model. Well, let us
Mm-hmm.
take that kind of understanding and entrepreneurial innovative wisdom to this work.
Mm-hmm.
We need to create new models, to model them, to practice them so that the old models become obsolete. And that's the work
Mm-hmm.
of RX racial healing.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, people engaged in this work, we got to be able to live it. If we can't live it, then no one else can. And that's across the board. So, new model. Is this then the RX for racial healing? Is that the new model? Can you
Yes,
can you tell us? Okay, can you tell us about RX? I like the phrase, for example, is when I was prescription to use a medical, for racial healing. Yeah, that's pretty good. So what's this
thank
new
you.
model RX? Look, part of me is so excited, but I like your work. I'm just saying,
I,
I've been around the stuff.
uh, I'm,
I've lived 7 decades. I've seen a lot of stuff. I like your work. I like the way you put it.
thank
And we aren't going to win everyone, just like Jesus, right? He didn't save everyone, but he saved some. So I like this. So hey
thank you.
Doc, let me contain my enthusiasm for your work. Let me cool down.
Oh,
I'm a neutral host. Let me cool down. Okay.
well, I am honored by your enthusiasm and your appreciation. Literally, prescription doesn't mean a pill for an ill.
Mm,
Prescription literally means a recommendation that's made
mm,
with authority.
mm,
I believe that the sacrifices, the labors, the struggles of our ancestors, that's the authority upon which we stand to make this recommendation or this prescription racial healing.
mm,
Now, the book that I wrote about it captures the origin and development story of the model, which in many ways is described in the book, and I've talked about it, to some measure here. It evolved over decades, and I learned, that it is possible to bring people together and to facilitate sharing of stories, and that those stories are not only heard, but they are internalized. And when they are internalized, something happens in terms of our emotional capacity for understanding. And so I wrote the book, RX Racial Healing, because it is a step-by-step guide for those who would facilitate these types of experiences. It really is a how-to. I offer training and preparation for facilitators, but there's no way that I could train as many people, who need to have this knowledge. And so I partnered with the American Association of Colleges and Universities. They
Oh,
published the
wonderful.
book, and the book is distributed through them, and all of the proceeds from the sale of the book go to support the work. It does not come to me. That money goes to support. We now have over 70 college campuses in this country that have established centers on their campuses for this work. But definitely it's a process, and it is,
Yeah,
no one in the circle is devalued,
yeah.
and we're not telling stories of trauma. We are
Hmm.
telling stories that are reflective of human motivational needs
Hmm.
and agency. So we try to
Yeah,
embed certain fundamental concepts that have a physiological basis, in the sense that when I tell stories of my agency, when I tell stories of appreciation, those have a positive effect on my hormonal and neurology, so to speak, or neurohormones. They actually
yeah,
improve my balance. I increase my oxytocin levels, I
yeah,
decrease my cortisol levels. And so all of that understanding is built into the design of the approach. People will not leave these experiences feeling like you did earlier
hmm,
when you described that lecture that you listened to,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
We've taken what we know about engagement, about stress, and we facilitate an experience that not only helps you feel better, it also helps you to understand and
hmm,
subsequently to believe and to act differently.
yeah. That's beautiful, and I'm happy to hear that your book is in these college campuses. I think every college in America needs this book. Every high school in America needs this book. So we got a lot of work to do for sure. Yeah. Um, Look, I have enjoyed this conversation, but let me ask you one last question. Is there
Mhm.
anything else in your heart that you want to share with us that we haven't touched upon today?
I appreciate that question. I want to share that our country is ready to do the work. At my organization, the National Collaborative for Health Equity, we do an annual poll that we call the Heart of America survey. And we deliberately worked with a prestigious polling firm to design a set of questions that would appeal to our higher selves, or as Lincoln would have
Mm,
said, our
mhm,
better angels, right?
yeah.
And the results of this nationally representative, sample poll is that the majority of Americans, they want to unite. The majority of Americans want us to overcome our legacies of division, racial and otherwise. And they want us to find new tools and new language for bringing us together. And so
Mm,
the ground is fertile for us to move forward. There's an African proverb that says to stumble is not to fall, but to move
mhm,
forward faster. I believe that it is time, and that there really is the public will in this country to move
mhm.
forward faster and begin to actualize our true potential as a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious
Indeed,
democracy.
indeed, I love it. Uh, unlike that lecture I went to, in talking to you, I have a good feeling, a good feeling. I'm smiling. I'm like that audience you give that talk at TEDx, and I think though that this is time. This is the right time for us. So I thank you for saying yes when I extended this invitation for you to be on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation, and you're doing good work. I'm honored to be able to participate.
Okay. Well, you've been listening to the Possibility Action Network podcast. Our guest today has been Dr. Gail Christopher. She's the author of the book RX for Racial Healing. Until next time, good day.
You are not alone. Just keep on, keep on, keep on going. Just press on, press on.